It is the 1990s, and there are hundreds of unsolved murders along the rails. FTRA member F Troop stabs fellow rider Mississippi Bones. 1 year later, Bones comes back to shoot F Troop 5 times. His body is found in a Montana rail link boxcar. 1996, a train rider known as Sidetrack is caught and admits to having killed 28 people all across the country, many of them homeless, many of them bludgeoned to death. Police label Sidetrack as a member of the FTRA. 2011, Dirty Mike is arrested for beating another traveler to death. In an interview with a reporter from the Richmond Times-Dispatch, Dirty Mike is asked how many people he's killed. More than 16, less than 30. I'm proud of what I did. Dirty Mike says an FTRA member taught him how to get away with murder. He talks about selling heroin across the country, saying, "You spent 30 years chasing a mortgage. I spent 30 years chasing sunshine." After speaking with him, the reporter concludes, "Incarceration is about protecting us from people like Dirty Mike." 2016, Robert James LeCoux, known FTRA member, murders his wife and 2 in-laws in Montana, shooting the 3 of them in the head. He is caught and held on $10 million bond, and ends up receiving a prison sentence of 300 years. In 1999, LeCoux had beaten a homeless man to death with a baseball bat and served 10 years in prison. How much of a threat is the FTRA, often referred to as the railroad's version of the Hells Angels? In a 1997 article by the LA Times, a reporter interviews Sideline, a member of the FTRA. The article says that Sideline mentions Horizontal John, a rider who drank himself to death. "They said we killed Horizontal John. Well, America killed Horizontal John. He had Agent Orange from Vietnam. Me, I just don't like people. It's hard for me to deal with the job because I don't take orders well. But I got what I need. I got a tent, a sleeping bag, a dog. What do I need with a house, a mortgage, 12 kids running around? I'm not bothering anybody. My camp's clean." The LA Times reporter meets Melford Lawson, one of the self-proclaimed founders of the FTRA, a veteran who claims the group started in 1982 in the town of Libby, Montana. Lawson says, "They're trying to accuse us of every murder between here and Montana. Sure, there was Sidetrack, but how many Jeffrey Dahmers, John Wayne Gacy's are there? He's like a bad apple. Everybody's got one. I swear to God, all we do is ride trains and stay drunk. They call us a gang. How do you organize 5,000 drunks? We can't even agree on what kind of beer to drink." Welcome to Oogle Radio. This is not HBO, this is HOBO. We're here today to talk about some of the myths and legends surrounding freight hopping. Joining us, we have my friend Henry. Hey, Henry.
Hi.
As well as Matt Derrick, the creator of the website Squat the Planet and author of the book The Anarchist's Guide to Travel. Thanks for coming on, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so let's jump into it by talking about the focus of the episode, the FTRA. So this is something that I found on trainorders.com from 2004. It's this forum post someone wrote. "Some time ago, I saw a documentary on the FTRA, Freight Train Riders of America, a gang of murderous hobos primarily on the West Coast. Are they still carrying out their work?"
I'm fairly familiar with the FTRA. I mean, and I've ridden with one FTRA person, like in my train hopping career many years ago. And it's funny where the line between reality and fiction lies with that whole organization. I personally lean on the side that the majority of it is fiction, especially in the past 20 years. They are almost non-existent in the past 20 years. And even when they were like a big deal or whatever, I really feel like it's just a case of like, like D&D and Satanic Panic, you know what I mean? It's just the media blowing up something that probably wasn't as big of a deal as the reality was.
I've heard a lot about FTRA for like considering I've never run into
You certainly
FTRA.
heard the rumors though, right?
Yes. I think you bring up an interesting point because I wonder how much we hear about them is just like sensationalized or like, like
Hmm.
the cops or the media or both making it out to seem like it's something that it maybe wasn't or like mostly wasn't, blowing shit out of proportion basically. There's certain places on the west coast or out west that are still to this day pretty hot, and I've heard that it is because of the FTRA. I don't, and I'm like, now I'm wondering like how true is that actually, like how
Hmm.
true are the rumors.
There is this element of like Western tall tale mythos of like you have these group of murderous hobos that just hang around the jungles. And I think to an extent, there were maybe a few instances of that through the 80s and 90s. And I think like that is documented. And maybe some of those people claimed like, oh, I'm FTRA. But to me, I see it as like just a group of people that they literally ride freight trains, and then they've ridden it enough that they're like, oh, do you want to join my crew? And they're like, yeah, sure, whatever.
I was just gonna real quick say I think that tall tales in general, there is definitely like all across train riding and its subgroups, tall tales. The telling of tall tales is, I think, a part of train riding culture.
The Wikipedia article that mentions the FTRA, one of their sources is from like policemag.com. And
Hmm.
this dude was
Mm.
just wrote this article in 2007 about the idea of like, oh, there's a group of like uh members of the FTRA that, they're like known criminals, and some of them are murderous or violent, and be on the lookout for this graffiti. I think there's
Hmm.
one good comment as kind of like counterpoint. He says, I assume that the officer who wrote this has no idea what he's talking about, as well as low self confidence, a superiority complex concerning the poor and the homeless, and marriage troubles stemming from inadequacy issues. Keep fighting the little guy. Forget about the
Damn.
actual biker gangs, the real mafia, Crips, Bloods, MS-13, the KKK, and those terrible clown dressing juggalo idiots.
There's basically like the old heads, the original members of FTRA from like as far back as like the 60s, uh, or somewhere around there, probably late 60s, early 70s. Everyone died out. Like, and at some point there was a transition from the old, what I call the old guard, the original people, and to this new generation of quote unquote FTRA people. And I don't think the new generation of people that claim to be FTRA are really FTRA either in name or in spirit. When I rode with an FTRA member, they specifically told me like anyone that claims to be FTRA and is under the age of like 40 is probably a fucking liar. So the person I rode with went by the moniker of No Nuts. His story was that he literally his nuts got shot off in Vietnam.
Holy
And
shit.
afterwards he had just come back and just started hoboing basically and been doing it for the rest of his life. I'd be very surprised if he was still alive. This was back, I want to say like 2006, 2007 maybe, and he was already pretty old by then, but still getting around really well. I mean, he had to be in his 70s, I think. Very nice guy. I had zero problems with him. It was like the first time I was in Roseville in the train yard there, and he showed me all around and told me how everything worked and all that good stuff, and it was just really cool about it. And I was riding with a couple other kids too, and he just joined us, and we were all drinking beers and hanging out and having a good time. And we all ended up riding up north, and I think we parted ways somewhere in Oregon. He mentioned that he was part of FTRA and stuff, but like was pretty quick to be like the original group, not any of this bullshit new school poser FTRA kids. Because I mean, all the honestly, everyone I've met under the age of 40 that claimed to be FTRA was like just your typical like scumbag gutter punk.
I have met a person who claims to be FTRA as well. Interestingly, this was not when I was train hopping, but when I was hitchhiking across the country. And this dude sees me flying a sign, and he goes by Hobo Memphis. And he's
Mhm.
probably in his 50s and is talking about how like his liver's failing and he's got like 10 years left to live, probably, and shit like that. But he's like, yeah, there's like five original FTRA members and like four of them are dead and I'm the last one or something like that. And he talks about how there's like special like FTRA jungles that are different from the regular hop outs that people will go to, that are just kind of like in the know type of spots.
Hmm.
He seemed like a pretty chill dude when I was with him, but I think, you know, most, not most, but like some of the stories he was telling me seemed like some really like pretty like unbelievable stories, as in like probably didn't happen. But he did tell me one story where he was riding a coal train and then a scorpion got in his sleeping bag and just like kind of like stung him in the face three times, and he actually had photos to prove that. So that's one.
Oh man,
Damn.
That's messed up.
that's rough.
God.
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
that's the one FTRA guy that I've met who I think is like kind of credible.
It seems like the OG FTRA people were probably pretty like hardcore, fully in it, like just probably full-time traveling, like didn't really have anything else besides train riding. And
yeah.
I think that forming groups and like grouping together and whatever gives people a sense of, I guess, security and maybe even, I don't know if pride is the right word, like honor.
Maybe
I
solidarity.
Yeah, and just like having kind of like codes of conduct and stuff like that. So I wonder if like that maybe was originally why FTRA existed. It's become mythologized as like violent hobos, this and that. But like,
Yeah, and I'm sure like because a lot of them are, from what I was reading, ex-military, like if I meet anyone that is actually like a veteran, I have kind of an easier time believing, okay, you probably were in some form of like FTRA.
I'm just kind of judging more based on like my experience, not just my experience, but what I hear and used to hear from other hobos throughout, 25 years of traveling.
So, since we're here talking about just rumors and stories, I want to ask you guys, from people that you've traveled with, what's been some of the most like tall tale stories that people have told you where you're like, there's no way this really happened?
Very, very early on in like the early 2000s, I never traveled with them, but I just kept running into this kid that was like my age, like, 22, 23 at the time, named Charlie Brown. Because he had like shaved head, literally wore a yellow shirt with like the black squiggly stripe.
oh my god.
And I kept running him into town and be like, hey, what's going on? And he was like super nice and stuff. But anyways, he told me a really funny story about like how he was riding a gondola. It was like a string of gondolas, and I think he thought it was like maybe like wheat germ or something like that, like just like ground wheat, you know. And he's like laying in it like sand. Well, it turns out that it's fermenting, right? And that's the
Mm.
type of shit that like used to make like towns go crazy in the medieval ages and like burn witches, because they were tripping balls. And after like a few like a day or so traveling on this train, he became convinced he was moving the train with his mind.
Oh my god.
And like making it stop and go, like and things like that. And I thought that was pretty funny.
This is not really like travel related, but there's this one rail bridge in the Bronx that I remember climbing maybe around 10 years ago. And I just ran into this dude smoking weed up there. I totally wasn't expecting it because it's like 3 a.m. You don't expect to run into someone on a bridge. And I'm
Mm.
like, hey, man, how's it going? And he's like, oh, I just come up here to look for aliens, basically. The next question I have is what are some of the rumors and misconceptions around train hopping? Because it is something that is so mythologized.
I mean, one thing I can think of is like back when I was a teenager and first met train riders, I thought that everyone just rode suicide. Like this was just
Yeah.
I guess I just like that like people would talk about riding suicide and I kind of just thought that's like what you did. Like I remember this one kid, I was at a rainbow gathering when I had like just turned 17. I was still in high school. I was dumb, but I was at this rainbow gathering and this kid named Mayhem who called himself a night walker. Uh he told me about people dying. He told me, like he was like, "You have to wear a skank when you're going through train tunnels because the fumes get really bad," but he told me about people dying in train tunnels because the fumes got so bad.
Mhm.
I don't know, like, since I've actually, like, years and years have gone by, I've ridden through, like, a good amount of train tunnels on my own. Like, I've never, like, actually heard of that happening to anyone, but that is I guess kind of maybe a tall tale that that kid was telling.
Mhm.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it might have been true back in the day just because trains used to emit like so much harsher chemicals, I would imagine,
Mm.
with just all the diesel they're expelling. But now you ride through
Yeah.
a train tunnel and you're pretty
I
fine. And
don't
I will say I have ridden through those tunnels and just kind of like laid low and put a bandana on and put some water over it. And I do find it does make a difference for
It
the
does.
air
And I
quality.
will say it also makes a difference because I've been through some long tunnels while really like stupidly close to the front of the like I've been like, 6 or
mm.
7 cars back from the leads riding through long like miles long tunnels and that has actually gotten scary.
Yeah,
Like
dude, that's nasty. Like in open air.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, even in open air and so going through tunnels, even with something covering my face that close to the leads was not the move, and I would highly recommend not riding that close to the leads if you know you're gonna be going through train like, long tunnels.
That's a subject that's come up quite a bit on Squat the Planet, like over the past like 20 years. It comes up periodically. Um, as far as I am aware, and I'm sure there's going to be some train hopper out there, some train nerd, that's going to totally correct me on this, but as far as I'm aware, like the longest train tunnel in North America, I think, is like east of Vancouver, BC. But I think it's somewhere around like 8 miles or something like that long. It's a
Yeah, I rode through
corkscrew
it.
tunnel. You've ridden through that?
Yeah.
Okay. I have not. So, but I've always heard people talk about it and stuff. I've never heard of anyone dying going through there, but I think the reason that people get concerned is because it's kind of a corkscrew, is what I've been told, and
Mm.
and that they have to fan it, like run these big fans to like push the exhaust from the train out after it goes through.
Probably whatever diesel formula they had before was a lot more toxic. And also, I don't know when those fans were installed too, because that's something I noticed in like the Montana tunnels. And
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, if they have these fans that are circulating the air, then that's kind of purposely so that nobody asphyxiates in the tunnel. But I don't know who
Mhm.
started doing that.
Like, I think that a lot of the dangers of train riding get blown out of proportion by people who don't really know anything about train riding, but I definitely think that it is smart to be concerned with your safety and take things like that seriously. and be prepared, basically.
How it gets blown up, like blown out of proportion, I think it's just like the lifestyle rather than the actual act. It's just like,
Yeah.
look at
Yeah.
these dirty kids and their filthy lifestyles. Like,
Well, I think the lifestyle ends up killing more people than actually riding trains does.
well, that's a very good point.
Yeah, I would, yeah, 1000% agree with that.
One sort of misconception slash rumor that I recently learned was, you know how when you go to any sort of train museum and they sell you those like little I don't know, it could be maybe like some sort of blanket or something that has all the old hobo symbols. And then as
Oh
far as
yeah,
I
yeah.
know, those are generally like a myth or something.
Yeah, I think that
Mm,
it's been largely debunked, for the most part. I mean, not that they never existed, but that they existed to the extent people think they do, um, or did, you know? Yeah, I mean, when it comes to hobo symbols thing, I would like ballpark, top of my head, like I would consider about 20% of it to be true. There was probably some symbols that some people used at some point, but like were they in mass use ever by like a crazy amount of people? I seriously doubt
Yeah, and in a way,
yeah.
we do have our own symbology now of like you go to a hop out and people will say like westbound or whatever, and then you see 10 people tagging that, and you're like, okay, so this is the westbound hop out or something. And then they sometimes will write like what time the train comes, and a lot of the time the information tends to be pretty accurate in my experience, just under this bridge.
it. But and it's just like some of those symbols too are just kind of hilarious because it's just like I don't know, like kind woman lives here,
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
pretty.
Yeah.
Like, some are like a little more useful, like I guess, like if you're trying to use a tag to say like the cops patrol here regularly or something. But and honestly, I just I can't really think of any train hopper friends I know that like really seriously will tag us a hobo symbol in seriousness. It's usually kind of just a little like tongue in
Yeah.
cheek, like, haha, like, oh, that's funny. Someone wrote some books on the subject, like did a bunch of studies and found out it's kind of like it was largely untrue. The same way that we kind of like hold up like pirates and things like this as this like super like glorious adventurous like type of thing, whereas like the reality of is kind of like that pirates were actually pretty kind of really shitty people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
train hoppers.
And they would do really bad things, and but the lifestyle, the adventure of it is what it got glorified in over,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
hundreds
a
of years.
lifestyle, there's an adventure, there's an aesthetic, and there's sort of an appeal of escapism that I think is gonna, stand out to like some dude who's, working in an office or some kid who's stuck at school doing algebra and is like, fuck, I want to be a pirate.
The same thing applies to like the hobo culture, how it gets glorified.
Yeah. I've always kind of felt like there were parallels between the two like phenomena. Like not that train riders and pirates actually are that similar, but like the way that the way that they get talked about or like thought about and glorified, as you were saying.
Hmm.
The similarity is lawlessness.
Where I think train hopping mythology ties into American culture is just the idea that to me, America is a place that tends to reward rule breaking, generally speaking, throughout its history. And I think that's
Hmm.
part of why these stories take off so much more than in any other country.
Would you
Yeah,
Are you saying like America rewards rule breaking? When you say that, do you mean like
Either
just
counterculture
culturally?
or criminality, or because you have these
But
stories like
we're
uh
not bad people. We're plucky adventurers.
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
you have pioneers, you have things like even like Wolf of Wall Street, right? Of like, you have this person that like scammed their way to the top and you're just fascinated by it.
Like public opinion rewards rule breaking.
I think in the United States compared to so many other countries, yes, in my
Yeah.
experience of like the different cultures.
Hmm.
Honestly, yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't know if I think that the government itself rewards rule breaking,
Sure,
but
but I'm talking about like
Yeah.
the
that
dominant
would be
culture
sick.
in general.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, it
definitely.
depends
People
on the rule
determine
breaking.
culture.
There's some shitty ass capitalists out there who are definitely breaking the rules and enjoying the hell out of
True.
it at
That's
the
Oh,
true.
government's
And I
behest.
guess sometimes those wires get crossed of like, there are people of like, oh, he's a maverick, like a certain billionaire that I'm sure you know who I'm thinking
uh,
of.
Oh yeah.
yes. Yep. I was just
Hmm.
thinking of that person just now. Yeah,
We don't
perfect
even have to say
example.
it. I've heard so many different definitions for this, and I want to hear what you guys have heard. There's this idea of like in riding trains, at a certain point, you get your black skank, which is like your black bandana. And
Oh
so,
yeah.
like, what is the initiation process for that, for what you guys have heard? Because I've heard all kinds of
This
things.
I'm just going to interject because I think Henry's going to have more to say about than I do, just because like this was just not a thing.
Hmm,
Like my with my generation, Gen Xer, it just wasn't a thing.
hmm.
Like and then like towards when I started like slowly stop writing, being involved in that culture, like it really cropped up as like skanks, 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 like you know, like I don't know. And I was like, what the fuck's a skank? Like I was the old man, like what are you damn kids talking about?
Uh,
Um, so it seems like a newer generation thing to me.
hmm,
I was gonna say, I honestly, I think this might be because I was introduced to train riding, and like a lot of my riding has been with people older than me, people from the previous generation. Like maybe that's why I don't know. I mean I know like people call have always used the term skank ever since I like was introduced to train riding, but I never heard of getting your black skank. I never heard of that, honestly.
Someone told me once you've ridden your first 10,000 miles, that's when you
Mm,
your black bandana. And then the one thing I've seen on Squat the Planet, someone writes, in the train world, black means you're riding the high line, blue the midline, and red the sunset, as like kind of a color coded thing for like
Hmm.
old, now defunct rail groups or rail gangs, as you might call them.
I
Yeah,
mean, it's all really kind of arbitrary, though, isn't it? I mean, no one's sitting there with a
yeah.
pedometer, you know,
Yeah, exactly.
I
like,
am. I don't
like,
know about you guys.
sorry, I have this
Nah, you're
black skank
different,
for you,
Dan.
but you're 2 miles short of 10,000. You
I
know?
yeah, I started tracking every mile like a couple years ago just to be like,
Yo,
I wonder.
you're built different. I respect the fuck out of that, and I think it's really cool. And when I first started writing, I didn't even really want to like take pictures because I would just wanted to like. I remember when I first started writing, I was like anti taking pictures because I was just like it takes away from the experience. Ah. And now I'm not like that anymore. But
I wish I had taken more. One of the things I always encouraged every new traveler I ever met, it's like take a fucking camera. You know,
hmm
don't spend all day looking through the viewport of your camera, but take some pictures. Make sure to take some fucking pictures. And I guarantee you, you will look back on it 10, 20, 30 years later and thank yourself for doing that.
yeah,
Because that shit, memories fade. And
yeah,
it's really helpful to be able to look back on those photos and be like, oh my God, I remember that person or whatever. And but you know what? I'll tell you what, that's probably one of my most ignored pieces of advice. Like
really.
most people don't do it. Yeah. And I'm like, oh man, you're gonna regret it. Like now it's easier since we got cell phones and stuff.
Matt, what year did you hop your first train?
That would have been 8.
Okay, so
Uh,
I was just wondering, since you are a little older than us, what are sort of the differences with the act of train riding and the cultural of train riding in the 90s versus today, or like as recently as you can think?
I have to question whether I'm just looking back at this and with rose-tinted lenses. You know what I mean? Like, am I just looking at just the good stuff, and that's the way I grew up? And but it seems like the culture at the time in like the early, like late 90s to the early 2000, or to like almost 2010 probably, was like the golden era for me train riding, and it
Mm.
felt like a lot of like just really cool punk kids and like activists and other anarchists and other, alternative type people, like just kind of using it as a secret means to travel around, have fun, but also like go see the world and go to different places, but also like participate in activism like around the country. I'm sure there was a lot of like dirty scumfuck kids back then, as much as there are now. But nowadays, I do feel like the whole culture as a whole has really gone down the toilet. But maybe always was in the toilet. Who knows?
Yeah, I think one difference I've noticed over the past 10 years is just I don't run into people like I used to, honestly. Like,
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, I do notice that. I used to run into people all the time on train riding.
I love
Uh,
running into people, honestly.
yeah. Oh yeah, it's great. It was generally very pretty friendly interactions.
Yeah. Like,
Unless they told me they were
obviously.
FTRA, and then I walked away.
I will say I've noticed, well, I mean, I think you would both agree train riding has become way more gay, like openly. Like I'm
Uh-huh.
sure, like I know that there've always been queer MFs out there, but like there's like whole contingents of like gay and trans people riding now, and I think that's pretty cool because when I first met train riders as a youth, as a youngin, I it was like mostly just dudes.
like what would be your go-to travel stories? Just like something that happened to you in your travels that you really love telling to people as like the go-to story. I guess we could start with you, Matt, if you have one that comes to mind.
One of the things that I kind of prided myself on was just exploring like every different avenue of travel, even outside of train hopping.
Oh, of course.
I think there tends to be a lot of like little too much hyper focus on like the train hopping thing,
I
while
agree.
ignoring all these other different subgenres of underground travel.
And why limit yourself?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so one of the things I went out to explore was living on a sailboat. I moved to Key West, Florida to live on a sailboat with a friend of mine, and we had no sailing experience. I did not know how to swim
Oh,
at the
that's
age of 34, I believe, at that time. Uh, and we were just like, well, we'll figure it out, you know? And the first night we get our boat out onto the water, like there's a huge storm, and I'm sitting at the bow of this boat, that's like going up and down by about 10 feet or so, with a like really crappy life
Holy
vest
shit.
on, trying to figure out how to set an anchor so that we don't float and wreck on the shore. And I'm just flying up and down. It's the middle of the night, and I'm just like, what the fuck have I got myself into? Like, but you know what? We figured it out, we set the anchor because we fucking had to. and and I lived through it, and a bunch of other crazy adventures happened where I just like not almost drowned, but like some scary close calls. You know what? I learned to swim. I had a really good experience, but I also figured out that that lifestyle is not for me.
what was the moment where you knew like I can't do this?
The whole plan was to get into a sailboat and sail up, up and down probably like the East Coast. And the sailboat itself was a utter fucking disaster. Just because like that boat never left its fucking mooring. Like the entire 6 months I was there. Any boat adventures I did have, which I did have some great adventures out to the Dry Tortugas and some other places around Key West, uh, were on other people's boats. I lived, and Ryan, I apologize for this, but I lived with a massively irresponsible person. We could not even get the things that we needed for the boat, like the engine working, and or pay for, the insurance or our safety equipment, a whole bunch of other stuff that just like would get our boat seized if Coast Guard did a search. Uh, and like things you're required to have, much less actually go out sailing. It was kind of a bummer. And after about 6 months, I was like, I think, I've been out on the water, and a lot of it is just boring as hell. Like you're just sitting on the water for days on end, and the movement never ever stops 24/7. And it will never stop. After a while, I was just like, I tasted it, I dipped my toe in, you know, not for me. And I'm okay with that. And I left. But that's okay. I think that's the moral of the story, though, is that it's absolutely okay to just like try things, whether it's like train hopping or having a school bus to live in, or living out of your car, or hitchhiking, or whatever the fuck, and just try it out for a while. If it's not for you, that's fine. There's no shame in like going home and doing something else. Although I
Yeah.
think a lot of people will talk shit on people that aren't like trade core for life, like or whatever.
Yeah,
But
the whole "I'm more homeless than you" aesthetic.
yeah, uh, I've got more hopeless points. It's the point is that you took the chance, had the adventure, and maybe hey, maybe it does work out, and you do it like I did for like fucking 20 plus years, and you know, and I wouldn't take any of it back for the world.
Hmm. Okay, thanks, Matt. What about
Mhm.
you, Henry? What's your go-to travel story?
The thing that first came to mind when you asked that was this time. This was like one of my very first traveling experiences before I ever rode trains when I was a teenager and I went to that rainbow gathering, the Montana gathering. We had gotten there not hitchhiking, but like we found a random person to drive us there that was already going. On the way out, we just like hitched a ride with some dude who was driving out in like this shitbox minivan. That guy was drunk and stoned and maybe on mushrooms and was like driving out of the gathering like down these mountains, and like I was so scared because I was in the back seat, which was ripped out, turned to the side like a couch, and had no seatbelts and wasn't like actually attached to the vehicle, so I was just like flailing around. And I was like, and I actually like ended up screaming at the person I was with, like, you need to start driving now. Like, make him stop the car because I didn't know how to drive. I didn't have a license. But anyway, then we ended up like picking up this kid that was also hitching out of the gathering, and he was kind of like a good luck charm at the time. Like I was like fully like femme presenting or whatever. Like that is a thing that happens a lot. Like you get exploited, it is true, you get taken advantage of. But this guy was like a good luck charm, and he was really nice to me, and I was like, wow, you're nice, you're actually not like a creep, and you're being nice to me. That's Please come, please ride with us, make this safer. And we were in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and then we drove down to Fort Collins, and we were hanging out on the river side, and the people I was with saved this person from drowning. Like we just happened to be hanging out on the side of the river, like on the riverbank, and there were these two women that were tubing. There was like a tiny little like rapids thing, and the one woman like went through it on her tube and like fell out of her tube. She was tubing, but she did not know how to swim at all. She just started drowning, like no life vest, didn't know how to swim, and I'm like, you probably shouldn't do that if you don't know how to swim. But anyway, that good luck charm kid and the other person I was with like ran out and actually no, it was the good luck charm kid whose name was Magpie. I remember the person I had been traveling with who was a dick and whatever, like he just stood there like doing nothing and I remember looking at him and being like you are like, I ran out to try to help too, but Magpie was already out there and saved this woman from drowning, like, pulled her out and, like, helped her get to shore. And, like, if it wasn't for the fact that we randomly were at this gas station at the exact moment that kid was there, like, we wouldn't have even picked him up and given him a ride, and just I guess that story sticks out to me not because it's even that wild or crazy, but because that's the feeling that accompanies most of the stories I have about traveling that are like the most impactful is by chance things come together and it feels like it was supposed to happen this way, but really it's just like a series of fortunate coincidences.
So I just want to ask you guys if you have any words of advice or wisdom for anyone who might be listening and interested in this kind of thing.
The whole reason that I started Squat the Planet and wrote a book and did all this stuff was always like the core goal of everything always was just to encourage people to get out there and broaden their horizons. I just think you can't live a full enriching life without getting out there and doing things and seeing people and experiencing places, people. It just broadens your opens your mind, it broadens your experience and makes you a different person and a better person, you know? And so I would encourage anyone out there that are like wondering like, well, maybe I should just stay put and do the same thing I've always done, or, maybe I should take an adventure and it doesn't have to be train hopping or anything specific, and you don't have to commit to it your whole life. But, if you do get out there and try something new, I pretty much guarantee you'll come back a better person for it.
Yeah, I think some people
Yeah.
pray their whole lives for the opportunity to do some kind of month-long adventure once.
And if you're lucky enough to do a dozen 1 month adventures, like do it.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
fit as in much in as you can before you get old, because I'm starting to get to the point where I can't do all the things I used to be able to do. So please do it while you're young. But if you're old and haven't done it yet, don't let that stop you.
A few years ago, my friend in New York asked me if I had any like info on like getting into traveling, like underground travel, like what you said. I guess that's the term you used. And
Sure.
I told him to read the book that you wrote, Matt, and he
I
did.
appreciate the plug.
He did, and he read it, and it had a big like, a really, I guess, profound impact. Like, it made him feel like it was possible, and I think he, like, struggled for a long time with feeling like and he's in his 30s, and I think he felt like, I don't know, is it too late for me? Like, all these doubts in his mind were keeping him back, but he finally did it, and he's out there on the road right now, and I think he's having a really good time, and he's with his dog, and I'm really, really happy for him, and I think he's doing it and he's having that exact experience you were saying that people should not deprive themselves of, and anyone can do it. Like, even if you have like a job and a place to live and a dog and you're like really like settled somewhere, like it's not too late. There's always a way. It might take some logisticating and some planning, but you can figure it out and you can do it. How do I say this in a not weird way? Basically, if you're not just a cis dude and you're scared that traveling can't be for you because the world tells you that you can't do things by yourself, that's bullshit. And you totally can. And there's so many badass, like, femme people out there on the road. And you do not need a man to bring you into it, and be your badass self and don't let anyone fuck with you, basically.
Hell yeah.
Yeah,
I
two
love
things.
that.